The steel jaws slammed shut with a brutal snap that cracked through the pines like gunfire. Yazi hit the ground hard, a bolt of agony tearing up her leg as iron teeth locked around her ankle. Her palms tore open against bark and dirt as she tried to catch herself. For a heartbeat, she lay frozen, breath pounding in her chest. Then the panic came rushing in like a flood. She knew that sound. It was meant for deer, for wolves, not for people. And still, there she was, snared like an animal. She clawed at the trap, but the more she fought it, the deeper the metal bit into her flesh. She swallowed the scream rising in her throat. Out here, sound carried. Sound brought death. Weeks ago, the Ironcoat Riders had driven her people south, scattering Yazi's band across the land. She had stayed behind, chasing the last thread she had left. Her younger brother, Nico, gone after a raid and never found. Now she stood alone in a world that had already swallowed everything she loved, and the trap had finished what the soldiers started. Then she heard it. Boots crushing through brush, her head snapped up. A man stepped out from the trees, tall and broad, a rifle hanging low in his hand. His hat cast his face in shadow, and he moved with a slow, steady calm that chilled her more than any charge would have. He looked like he belonged to this land, like he owned it, and in her mind, there was no doubt. He set the trap. He came to claim what it caught. It was Brock Maddox, a cowboy turned trapper after frost wiped out his crops and left him with nothing but the wild. He'd been running lines for weeks, praying for rabbit, for deer, for anything that would keep him alive. Never a human, never an Apache woman. He stopped a few paces away, eyes steady, weighing what stood in front of him. He had seen Ironcoat Riders drag people from these hills, seen Dustvale folk spit at the sight of anyone like her. He knew exactly what she saw when she looked at him. Another threat, another man who would take. Slowly, he lowered his rifle to the ground and raised both hands, palms open to the sky. His voice came out low and even. "That trap's for game, not you. I'm gonna get you out." Yazi's eyes narrowed, her fists pressed into the dirt as she watched him like a cornered wolf. Words burned at the back of her throat, but fear locked them in place. She tracked every move he made, ready to fight the second he stepped too close. Brock Maddox crouched slowly, tipping his hat just enough so she wouldn't have to meet his eyes. His hands worked the iron spring with care. "This is gonna hurt," he muttered, almost gentle. The jaws snapped open. Pain ripped through her leg like fire, but she clenched her teeth and swallowed the cry. He tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped her ankle with steady, practiced hands. No hesitation, no greed, no claim, just respect. Yazi studied him hard, suspicion still sharp, but something else flickered beneath it. Confusion. If he meant her harm, he'd already wasted his chance. She gave her name under her breath, testing him. He repeated it. Rough. Not quite right, but careful. Then he gave his own. Brock Maddox. The forest seemed to go still around them. She could leave, limp off into the wild, alone, or follow the man who had just freed her. Neither path promised safety. Her eyes searched his face, weathered by sun and wind, his jaw set like a man who carried more than he said. He held out his canteen without stepping closer. Thirst broke her hesitation. Her hands trembled as she drank. He rose, slinging the rifle back over his shoulder. "Cabin's close," he said. "You can make it." She tested her weight and winced, but nodded anyway, fear still wrapped tight around her chest. But under it, something else had taken root. A thin, fragile thread of trust. He had freed her. He didn't have to. That meant something. They moved together down the trail, Brock Maddox keeping just enough distance so she wouldn't fall, but never closing in enough to trap her. Silence stretched between them, heavy with doubt. She wondered if he'd turn on her. He wondered if she'd run. Two strangers tied together by survival, walking toward something neither of them could see. Yazi wanted answers. Who he really was, why he let her live, and whether following him meant freedom or a slower kind of cage. She had seen men like him before. Dustvale folk dragging women away, ironcoat riders doing worse. Her thoughts twisted with every dark ending she'd ever witnessed. But the other choice was worse. Alone, wounded, walking into a land where wolves and men hunted the same way. So she kept moving, one step at a time, testing if his actions would hold true. Brock Maddox knew exactly what haunted her mind. He carried ghosts of his own. He had ridden with the Holt Syndicate once, men who burned through lives like dry grass. He had stood by and watched Yazi's band driven from their canyon, flames swallowing their homes while ironcoat riders closed in. He hadn't lifted a hand. That failure still lived in him. But today, he had made a different choice. He had set her free, and that mattered, even if it didn't erase the past. They followed the creek, water slipping over stone, the air thick with pine and damp earth. At last, he broke the silence, his voice plain and steady. "Cabin small, just me, no one else?" Yazi studied him, searching for a lie. She found none. After a moment, she gave a small nod. When her ankle buckled on loose rock, his hand shot out on instinct. She jerked back, bracing hard. He froze, then slowly raised his hands and stepped away. "You lean if you want," he said. "If not, don't. Your call." Her anger faded as quickly as it had flared, and for the first time, she believed him. She sucked in a sharp breath through her teeth, fighting the pain as she forced herself upright without taking his hand, and Brock Maddox didn't move to help. He let her stand on her own. Questions hung thick between them, unspoken but heavy. She wanted to ask why a man chose to live this far from everything. He wanted to ask why she walked alone, cut off from Yazi's band. Neither of them gave voice to it. When the cabin finally came into view, its roof breaking through the trees, Yazi was the one who broke the silence. "Why traps, Cowboy?" she asked, suspicion woven into every word. But there was curiosity there too, quiet and sharp. Brock Maddox didn't hesitate. "Winters bite hard out here. Frost killed my corn. Mare went lame. I hunt what I can. Keep food in me, keep a roof over my head." There was no pride in it, just truth, just survival. They stepped into the clearing. The cabin stood worn and weather-beaten, smoke curling out of a crooked pipe, fences sagging like they'd been holding on longer than they should have. It wasn't a soldier's post, not a place built to conquer anything. Just a man. Holding on. That caught her off guard. He looked less like an enemy now, and more like someone who'd barely made it through the same world that tried to break her. He pushed open the gate and stepped aside. "Go on." He let her walk in first. It was a small thing, but she noticed. All the way here, he had given her one thing over and over again. Choice. She didn't thank him. She didn't trust him enough for that. But she stepped into the yard. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and old timber. One room, bare shelves, one bed, no hidden corners, no extra weapons, no other souls. That answered one question. He lived alone. Truly alone. Brock Maddox set his rifle against the wall. "You can sit," he said. I'll fix something to eat. Rest that ankle. He didn't step closer. Didn't try to close the space between them. He understood something most men didn't. Trust wasn't spoken into existence. It was earned. For the first time since the trap snapped shut around her, Yazi let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The fear didn't disappear. But it shifted, softened into something sharper, watchful, careful. The beginning of belief that maybe, just maybe, this man wasn't a threat. The place itself was simple. Rough pine walls, a low ceiling, a dirt floor packed hard from years of boots, a blackened stove, a plain table, one narrow bed with a worn wool blanket. Nothing hidden, nothing false, just the life of a man who built everything with his own hands. Brock Maddox caught her studying it. "Ain't much," he said. "Everything here, I put together myself." He moved slow, pulling down a tin of beans and a strip of salt pork. It wasn't much of a meal, but it was honest. He didn't ask if she was hungry. Out here, hunger didn't wait for permission. He sliced the meat, dropped it into a cast-iron pan, poured in the beans. Soon, the cabin filled with the smell of grease and smoke, harsh but strangely comforting. Yazi stayed near the wall, her ankle throbbing, her eyes locked on him. She thought about staying on her feet, ready to run the second something turned wrong, but her body reminded her of the truth. She wouldn't get far. Brock Maddox glanced over, reading her hesitation. He nodded toward the chair. "Sit if you want. Ain't gonna bite." It wasn't much of a joke, but it was enough to show something important. He wasn't her jailer. After a moment, she lowered herself into the chair, her gaze still sharp, still testing. He turned back to the stove, giving her space. When the food began to simmer, he reached for a small cedar box and pulled out a bundle of dried herbs. He crouched beside the table, holding them out where she could see. "For the swelling," he said. "Learned it from Morel Voss, years back. He didn't push it on her, just set it within reach. Let her choose." She studied it, then gave a small nod. When he moved toward her ankle, he did it slow, every motion clear. No sudden shifts, no tricks. She tensed, ready to shove him away if he crossed a line, but his hands stayed steady, careful. The cool herbs eased the burn as he wrapped them in cloth. Then he pulled back. No lingering touch, no claim. The suspicion in her eyes didn't vanish, but something else crept in beside it. Relief. The silence stretched again, thick and heavy, as the beans softened over the fire. Finally, she broke it. "Why stay out here alone?" Her voice was low, guarded. Not idle curiosity. Survival. Brock Maddox set 2 tin plates on the table. His tone was flat, like a man telling a truth he'd carried too long. "Worked cattle most my life. Rode with the Holt Syndicate. Didn't matter if a man dropped dead long as the herd kept moving." He paused, jaw tightening slightly. "Seen men shot over less than $1. Got tired of it. Found this land. Built what I could." A beat passed. "Town don't sit right with me, and I don't sit right with them, so I stay out here." The bluntness of it caught her off guard. There was no pride in his words, no bitterness dressed up as strength, just the truth. She weighed what he said against everything around her, the patched roof, the worn tools, the plain table. He wasn't lying. He set a plate in front of her, then waited. Only when she took the first bite did he sit down and eat. The pork and beans were nothing special. Plain, rough, the kind of meal that kept a body going. But hunger took hold of Yazi fast, and before long her plate was scraped clean. Brock Maddox didn't comment on it, He simply refilled her tin cup with water, then sat down and ate his own portion in silence. When the last bite was gone, he gathered the dishes, rinsed them quick, and fed more wood into the stove. And then it lingered there, the question neither of them had spoken. Where was she supposed to sleep? There was only one bed. Her eyes drifted toward it, then back to him, measuring, watching. He caught it. "Floor gets cold," Brock Maddox said, voice steady. "Bed's the only real place to sleep. If that's a problem, I'll take the floor. But it's one or the other." No pressure, no demand, just fact. She studied him again. The way he'd kept his distance on the trail, the quiet way he ate, the care he took with her ankle. He hadn't acted like the men she feared. Not once. Slowly, she gave a stiff nod. "Same bed," she said, her voice tight, more necessity than choice. Brock Maddox didn't smile, didn't take advantage of it. He just nodded once. "All right?" Night settled over the cabin, swallowing the last of the light. Brock Maddox lay down on one side of the bed, turning toward the wall. Yazi stayed rigid on the other, every muscle drawn tight, ready to fight if she had to. But he never reached for her, never shifted closer. The only sounds were the soft ticking of the stove and the steady rhythm of his breathing. Little by little, her body began to loosen. Her thoughts still raced, but exhaustion dragged heavier than fear. And for the first time since the trap snapped shut around her leg, she felt something unfamiliar. Not trust, not yet, but something close to it. Proof, small and fragile, that this man might be different. The night stretched on. The stove kept the cold back, but the space between them stayed tight with tension. Yazi lay awake longer than she wanted, eyes open in the dim glow, listening to every shift, every breath he took. Brock Maddox didn't move. He stayed at the far edge of the bed, back turned, like he had drawn a line she could see without asking. Only once did he stir, pulling the blanket up against the cold. He never crossed into her space. That mattered, more than anything he could have said. Still, her breath came shallow, nerves strung tight as wire. A woman sharing a bed with a stranger always carried risk. Her thoughts drifted to Nico, the brother she'd been chasing through empty trails before the trap found her. Would he have trusted a man like this? Or would he have called her a fool for staying? The warnings of Yazi's band echoed in her mind, built on blood, on loss, on truths carved the hard way. And still, here she was, her ankle wrapped in his cloth, her stomach full of his food, lying in his bed. Every instinct told her she shouldn't feel safe, but weariness crushed those thoughts down. Slowly, against her will, her body eased, and sleep took her. Brock Maddox stayed awake long after her breathing settled into something soft and steady. His eyes stayed fixed on the rough wooden wall, thoughts turning over things he hadn't told her. He had given her part of the truth, not all of it. He hadn't said how many outfits he'd walked away from, how many saloons he'd left with blood on his knuckles, how many nights he'd drowned himself in whiskey just to quiet the ghosts that followed him. Out here, none of that had to surface. Out here, he could bury it. Still, he felt it in the way she looked at him, the tension in her shoulders, the way she braced at the smallest movement. He couldn't blame her. If their places were switched, he wouldn't trust him either. There was only one way forward. Time. And doing the right thing again and again until it meant something. Sometime deep into the night, her breathing deepened. Slow, heavy, real. He glanced over his shoulder, careful. In sleep, her face changed. The suspicion gone. The weight lifted. She looked younger, softer, almost unguarded. A quiet sense of relief settled in his chest. If she could sleep under his roof, even like this, then maybe he'd done something right. Only then did he let sleep take him. Morning came slow, pale light slipping through the cracks in the cabin walls. The fire had burned low, the air cool but not biting. Brock Maddox woke first. He rose quiet, careful not to wake her, pulled on his boots and set water on to boil. Soon, the smell of coffee filled the room, rich and steady. Yazi stirred, blinking awake, her body stiff from the strain of the day before. For a second, confusion crossed her face. Then memory came back. And she saw him. Not watching her, not waiting, just moving through simple, ordinary chores like she wasn't something to guard or control. That alone steadied her more than any promise ever could. When Yazi finally pushed herself upright, Brock Maddox slid a rough-cut piece of cornbread across the table toward her. "Eat," he said simply. "Goes down easier on a full stomach." She hesitated for half a heartbeat, then took it. The bread was coarse, dry at the edges, but it filled the hollow inside her fast enough. He poured coffee into a tin cup and set it in front of her, his hands steady, unhurried. She tasted it carefully. The bitterness hit sharp, but she didn't set it aside. After they finished, Brock Maddox brought out the herbs again, checking her ankle in the morning light. The swelling had gone down some. The skin was still flushed, but not as angry as before. "You'll move better today," he said, wrapping it with the same careful hands. This time, she didn't pull away. Her voice came softer now, edged with curiosity instead of suspicion. "Why didn't you send me off?" He met her eyes, really met them, for the first time, without looking away. "You got caught in my trap," he said. "That makes you my responsibility, at least till you're steady on your feet. Sending you out there like that." A brief pause. "Would have been the same as killing you, and I've seen enough of that." She studied him, hard, searching for anything false in his words. There was nothing there. No mockery, no hidden edge, just plain truth. For the first time, she gave a small, almost reluctant nod. Not trust, but something close enough to start. Brock Maddox only lifted his coffee again. Nothing more needed to be said. The morning settled into a quiet rhythm. He worked outside, splitting wood with slow, steady swings. Inside, Yazi swept the hard-packed floor with careful strokes, determined to show she wasn't a burden. He noticed. But he didn't say a word. He gave her that much. Her pride. By midday, something had shifted between them. She wasn't just the woman he'd cut free from a trap anymore. And he wasn't just the man who'd caught her in it. They were two people sharing the same roof because the world had left them no better choice. Both watching, both measuring, both wondering what came next. The days that followed fell into a rhythm neither of them would have called easy. But it held. Each morning, pale light crept through the cracks in the cabin walls, and Brock Maddox moved with quiet care. Never sudden, never sharp. He boiled water, brewed coffee, cooked whatever they had. Beans, cornmeal, strips of dried venison. Yazi noticed everything. The way he kept his movements slow. The way he let her choose where to sit. The way he never pushed her to speak before she was ready. Those small things. They mattered more than the food. Her ankle still ached, but with time and herbs, it began to bear her weight again. The first time she stepped past the cabin door, she faltered. Just once. His hand moved without thinking, reaching to steady her. She caught herself before he touched her, snapping upright, her glare sharp as steel. He stopped immediately, lifted his hands, stepped back, let her stand on her own. That moment settled something deep inside her. Would he use her weakness against her? No. That answer came clearer than any words could have given. And for the first time, a quiet fear inside her began to ease. She started to notice things she hadn't before, details that didn't match the picture of a man who meant harm. The cabin walls, patched with clay and moss where the wind once slipped through. A worn Bible resting on a shelf. And beside it, a small carving. A wooden horse, smoothed by hand. Not a weapon, not a tool. Something made with care. One afternoon, while Brock Maddox was outside splitting wood, Yazi picked it up, turning it in her fingers. When he stepped back inside and saw it in her hand, he didn't snatch it away, didn't look uneasy. He just said, "Carved that a long time back. Meant it for a boy who never got to keep it." A beat passed. "Figured I'd hang on to it." He didn't say more. She didn't ask. But the words stayed with her. In time, she began to give something back. Not much, just pieces. While sweeping the floor with willow twigs, she spoke quietly, almost to herself. "My brother used to do this. Back in camp. Too small to carry a spear. But he wanted to help." Her voice caught, then stopped. Brock Maddox didn't press her. Didn't ask for more than she gave. He only said, "How long's it been since you saw him?" She shook her head, unwilling to answer, and he let it drop. That mattered more than anything else. Still, one question stayed heavy in her chest. Was she free to leave? She never asked it out loud. But every time her eyes drifted to the door, the thought was there. Brock Maddox must have seen it. One evening, over venison traded from Elric Vane passing through, he spoke without looking up. "When your ankle's right, you can go, if that's what you want. Ain't nobody keeping you here." She searched his face for anything that didn't ring true. There was nothing. Days filled with work, quiet, survival. Something steady began to form between them. He showed her his traps, how the snare tightened, how the trigger caught, how scent moved with the wind. At first, she only listened, careful. Then she started asking. Why set bait near rock instead of open ground? Why raise some loops higher than others? He answered plain. No pride, no boasting, just knowledge, passed from one survivor to another. When Yazi suggested shifting one of the snares closer to a deer trail, Brock Maddox paused, studying the ground, then gave a small nod and moved it. That caught her off guard. He didn't brush her off, didn't treat her words like something to ignore. He treated them like they mattered, so she gave the same in return. Down by the creek, she showed him which roots could be crushed into a paste for wounds, which leaves, when boiled, could pull sickness from the body. He watched closely, committing every detail to memory. Out here, knowing the land wasn't a skill. It was the difference between living and dying. By the fifth night, something had shifted between them. She didn't flinch anymore when he set food within reach. He didn't keep one eye on the door like she might disappear at any second. They moved around each other with a quiet awareness. Two people who understood that in a place like this, staying enemies wasn't something either of them could afford. Still, the questions lingered. She wondered what had driven him this far from other men. He wondered what had torn her and Nico apart. Neither asked. Not yet. But both knew. The answers would come. For now, what they had was enough. The cabin, once tight with fear, carried a different weight now. fragile but steady enough to hold. By the 6th day, her ankle had healed enough for her to step outside without gripping the doorframe. The limp was still there, but she could stand. Move. That changed everything. She wasn't trapped anymore. She could see his land with her own eyes. For days, she had wondered if he meant to keep her hidden, like something caught and caged. Now she saw the truth. There were no fences, no boundaries, just endless forest and rolling hills stretching as far as the eye could see. If she chose to leave, nothing stood in her way, except the wild and whatever waited in it. Brock Maddox seemed to sense the shift in her thinking. "You can go farther now," he said. "I'll show you the ridge, where I set my lines." A short pause. Best way to see what this place really is. There was no pressure in it, just an offer. She took a moment, then nodded. She wanted to see if his words held true. They set out after midday, the sun high, the earth still damp from thawed frost. Brock Maddox walked a few steps ahead, rifle resting easy on his shoulder, eyes moving along the tree line. Yazi followed at her own pace. He never turned to hurry her, never reached for her unless the ground turned steep. And when her ankle slipped on loose stone, he didn't grab her. He stopped and waited. Let her find her footing. That told her everything she needed to know. He wouldn't take what wasn't freely given. The trail led them through pale aspen trees, their leaves thinning with the turn of the season. In a clearing stood an old pine, split clean down the middle by lightning. Brock Maddox nodded toward it. "Remember that scar? Means we're close." He showed her the snare, hidden beneath brush, bait set just right, the wind carrying scent where it needed to go. She crouched beside it, fingers testing the wire, her questions sharp. What happens if the wind turns? What if a coyote gets there first? He answered without pride, without lecture, the way one survivor speaks to another, not above, not below, equal. When she suggested raising the loop to match the stride of a buck, he paused again, then adjusted it exactly the way she said. That surprised her more than anything. Most men didn't listen. Fewer still changed their ways. On the way back, they found tracks pressed deep into damp soil. 2 horses, fresh, less than a day old. Brock Maddox crouched, running his fingers along the edges. "Not mine," he said quietly. Yazi felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, not exactly, something sharper. "Lawmen?" she asked under her breath. He shook his head once. "Too sloppy. Could be drifters." A pause. "Could be trouble." That word settled heavy between them. Was she safe here? Or had she only traded one danger for another? As if he could hear the thought, he spoke while they turned back toward the cabin. "If anyone rides through, they'll see the smoke. They'll ask questions." His voice stayed steady. "You don't answer. I will." It wasn't a promise. No man could make that out here. But it was something solid, something she could measure. Back at the cabin, she tested the truth of it. She walked past the gate, down toward the creek. Brock Maddox stayed where he was, on the porch, watching, but not following. That mattered. He wasn't keeping her. She knelt by the water, rinsing her hands, letting the cold run over her skin. And for the first time since the trap had snapped shut around her ankle, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like she could choose. That night, over a pot of venison stew, she finally asked what had been weighing on her since the beginning. "Why not stay in town? You trade. You deal with people. How do you keep living like this?" Brock Maddox chewed slow before answering. "I go when I've got hides to sell," he said. "Don't stay longer than I have to." A small pause. Town ain't for me. Folks ask questions I don't care to answer. He set his cup down. Out here, I do what I need to get by, and nobody asks who I used to be. His voice stayed flat, but the weight behind it was clear. He wasn't alone just because he wanted to be. He carried something he hadn't said out loud. Yosi could feel it in the spaces between his words. She didn't press him, but the silence that followed was heavy, crowded with questions neither of them dared speak. About his past, about Nico, about whether what stood between them would hold once the outside world came crashing back in. By then, her ankle could carry her weight. She moved without holding to the doorframe, a faint limp still there. But she was steady, free to step where she chose. There were no fences, no chains, nothing keeping her there but the land itself. And Brock Maddox never stopped her. He let her walk as far as she wanted. Somewhere in that space, between freedom and restraint, something began to form. Not trust, not yet, but the beginnings of it. 2 evenings later, trouble came riding in. The sun had dipped low, stretching long shadows across the clearing, when the sound of hooves broke the quiet. Brock Maddox stood by the shed, splitting kindling. Yazi sat near the creek, her ankle nearly whole again. At the first echo of horses, her body locked tight. Memories hit hard. Iron coat riders demanding water, traders with dead eyes and cruel hands. She rose slowly, turning toward him. He had already dropped the axe, rifle in hand, moving with the calm of a man who expected trouble, but refused to show fear. 2 riders pushed through the trees. They carried themselves loose, careless, the kind of men who took what they wanted because no one had ever stopped them. Dust clung to their coats. Pistols hung low at their sides. Their smiles weren't friendly. They called out before they even reached the porch. Their voices sounded easy, but their eyes moved sharp, scanning everything. The cabin, the shed, the thin curl of smoke rising from the stovepipe. They weren't here for kindness. They were measuring what they could take. Brock Maddox stepped onto the porch, rifle angled low, but ready. His stance stayed relaxed. His voice didn't. Evening. Inside, Yazi slipped to the window, keeping out of sight. The iron skillet sat heavy in her hands, her pulse pounding in her throat. One thought cut through everything else. Would he give her up to save himself? The taller rider leaned forward in his saddle, eyes settling on the rifle. Heard there's water out this way, he said. Creeks ran dry where we came from. Brock Maddox didn't shift. Creek runs clear past those trees, he said, nodding towards the woods. Plenty there. The younger one smirked, voice slick with arrogance. Water's not all we're after, he said. Could use a hot meal, maybe a place to sleep. His gaze slid toward the cabin door. He didn't say it, but he didn't have to. Brock Maddox's jaw tightened just enough to notice. Food's counted, he said. Cabin's mine. Best you move on. His voice stayed low, but it carried weight. The 2 men glanced at each other. The younger one let out a short, humorless laugh. That rifle of yours, he said. $50. Fair price. Brock Maddox shook his head once. Not for sale. The taller rider leaned back in his saddle, spit hitting the dirt. His hand drifted closer to the pistol at his hip. 50's cheaper than what it might cost you otherwise. The threat hung there, sharp as a drawn blade. Inside, Yazi's grip tightened on the skillet until her knuckles burned white. Her mind raced. If it came to gunfire, could she even stand her ground? Or would they drag her out before she had the chance? Her ankle still weak, her breath tight. Everything, Her fate, her life, balanced on what he did next. Brock Maddox didn't raise his voice, didn't move fast, but something in him shifted. "I ain't looking for trouble," he said. A beat. "But you'll find it if you keep pushing." His rifle stayed pointed toward the dirt, but his stance changed. Feet set. Weight ready. One step from cover. Every inch of him said the same thing. Ready. The moment stretched thin. 2 against 1. The riders measured it, but there was something in his voice, something quiet and certain, that cut through their bluff. He wasn't playing. Men like them knew the difference. The younger one muttered under his breath, tugging at his reins. The tall rider spat again, scowling. "Plenty of easier pickings out there," he said. They turned their horses, not fast enough to show fear, not slow enough to hide retreat. And just like that, they were gone. When the sound of hooves faded into the trees, Yazi finally let the breath out of her lungs. Her hands shook as she lowered the skillet. She had been ready for the worst, ready for him to trade her away. But he hadn't. He never spoke her name, never pointed her out, never used her as a shield. Something deep inside her shifted. Brock Maddox stepped back into the cabin, leaned the rifle against the wall, and poured water into a tin cup. He didn't mention the riders, didn't comment on her shaking hands. He just set the cup near her and went back to the stove, feeding the fire like nothing needed to be said. His silence said more than words ever could. He hadn't stood his ground for thanks. He'd done it because it was right. Nothing more, nothing less. That night, as the wind rattled against the cabin walls, Yazi stayed awake long after Brock Maddox had gone still, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. For the first time since the trap snapped shut, the sharp edge of fear dulled. Not gone, not yet, but changed. Not trust, but the beginning of believing he might not turn on her when it mattered most. The cabin settled into quiet after the riders were gone, but the silence wasn't empty. It carried weight, the kind that came from knowing how close things had come to breaking. Yazi sat at the table, fingers wrapped tight around the empty tin cup he'd given her. Her chest tightened with old memories, camps from years back, strangers arriving with smiles that never meant kindness, leaving with more than they were given, sometimes taking people who never returned. The skillet rested near her feet, heavier now that her hands no longer held it. Brock Maddox moved about the cabin, feeding the stove, checking the rifle, setting it back where it belonged. He had seen the fear in her eyes earlier, through the crack in the door. He knew better than to ask if she was all right. She wasn't, and words wouldn't change that. So he spoke of something else, something that mattered in a different way. "Preacher out of Santa Fe passes through now and then," he said, voice low. "Keeps a ledger, names, marriages, births, things the law'll honor." He paused, staring into the lantern light. "I got a paper from him once, never used it." Yazi frowned slightly, uncertain where this was leading. "What for?" He didn't look at her. "Had someone, once. Thought I might use it then." A breath passed. Fever took her before the preacher came back. His jaw tightened just a little. "Kept the paper anyway. Figured, maybe someday." His tone stayed even, but something raw sat underneath it. Yazi watched him carefully, suspicion stirring again. Was this his way of claiming her? Binding her to something she hadn't agreed to? But when she studied his face, she didn't see ownership. He hadn't said, "You will." He had only told her what was. He was sharing, not taking. That difference mattered. She set the cup down and leaned forward slightly, giving him something in return. "My brother," she said, her voice rough. "Last time I saw Nico, it was before the Ironcoat Riders drove us south." She swallowed hard. "He rode out with a group, never came back." Her words faltered, heavy in her chest. "I searched. No body, no sign, just gone." A pause. "Every trail ended empty. Every camp I found was ash." Her voice tightened. "Still I kept looking." Another breath. "Then I stepped into your trap." Brock Maddox didn't interrupt, didn't offer hollow comfort or empty promises. He gave her the one thing she needed most, his full attention. When she finished, he spoke quietly. "You still got time to find him," he said. "Maybe not here, maybe not today." A beat. "But time ain't run out yet." She stared at him, torn between anger at the hope in his voice and the part of her that wanted, needed to believe it. That night, as the stove burned low and they lay side by side again, something had changed. She didn't press herself to the far edge of the bed anymore. He didn't move closer. But the space between them wasn't built on fear now. It was choice. Her breath came uneven, still raw from what she had said. His steady breathing beside her gave her something to hold on to. The question that had followed her since the beginning came back. If danger came again, would he stand? Tonight she believed he would. Not because of the rifle resting nearby, but because he had already chosen not to betray her, when it would have been easier to do so. That choice meant more than any promise. Just before sleep took her, she whispered a single word in her own tongue. Soft, careful, unsure if he would understand. It meant not enemy. Brock Maddox didn't answer, but she heard the change in his breathing, felt the silence shift, and she knew he had understood. Whatever lay between them was still fragile, thin as ice over running water. Not love, not safety, but something in between. The first snow came sooner than either of them expected. Just a light dusting, gone by midday, but enough to warn what was coming. Brock Maddox stepped outside that morning, saw the frost clinging to the fence rails, and came back in with a look that said everything. "We need to get ready before the real cold hits," he said. From that day on, work filled every hour. He sealed the cabin walls with moss and clay, packing every crack tight to keep the wind from slipping through. Yazi tied bundles of kindling, stacking them beneath the bed to keep them dry. As her limp eased, she carried split wood to the pile by the door, refusing to stand idle. He noticed, but he didn't say anything. He let her earn her place. Then came the food. Brock Maddox sliced venison into thin strips, hanging them from the rafters to dry, showing her how to turn them so the smoke would cure them evenly. Yazi added her own knowledge. Herbs gathered from the creek, leaves that kept sickness at bay through the lean months. He listened the same way he handled a rifle. Careful, precise. Because out here, both meant survival. One night, while sorting herbs by the firelight, Yazi spoke without circling around it. "When the snow sets in deep, you stay out here alone all winter?" Her voice carried both curiosity and doubt. Brock Maddox didn't hesitate. "Always have," he said. "Easier than answering to folks in town. Cabin's quiet, and quiet's what I know." He paused, then added, softer. "Ain't saying it's the best way, just the way I've made it work." Yazi lowered her gaze to the fire. "My people don't stay here through winter anymore," she said. "Ironcoat riders keep pushing. Game runs thin. They move south." A breath caught in her chest. "I stayed." Another pause. When the snow comes, I got no one left to follow. Saying it out loud cut deeper than she expected. For the first time, she faced it fully. She was alone. That evening, Brock Maddox reached beneath the bed and pulled out a small cedar box. Inside was a folded paper, worn, smudged, but still intact. Blank spaces waited for names, for dates. Beside it rested a simple ring, hammered from a horseshoe nail and polished smooth by time. He set the box on the table, not pushing it toward her, not hiding it either. "Preacher rides through from Santa Fe now and then," he said. "Keeps a book, writes down names, marriages, births, makes it count when lawmen come asking." His fingers rested lightly on the edge of the box. "I got this paper years back, held on to it." Yazi frowned. "For what?" He didn't look at her. "Was for a woman I meant to marry once," he said. "Fever took her before the preacher came through again." A quiet beat passed. "Kept it anyway. Thought maybe someday." His voice stayed steady, but something under it was raw. Yazi watched him, suspicion flickering again. Was this his way of claiming her? Binding her without asking? But when she looked closer, she didn't see possession. He hadn't said "you will." He hadn't asked anything at all. He had only shown her what he carried, offered it, without demand. That was the difference. She rose without another word and stepped outside. The evening air bit cold, frost crunching beneath her boots as she made her way to the creek. She sat on the flat stone she had come to know, letting the quiet settle around her. She turned everything over in her mind. The way he held back when others would have pushed. The way he stood between her and men who meant harm. The way he listened, like her words held weight. None of it erased the danger of trusting him. But it proved something else. He wasn't the kind of man she had been taught to fear. When she returned, the cedar box still sat open on the table. Brock Maddox hadn't touched it, hadn't even looked at it. The choice stayed exactly where it belonged. With her. She sat down across from him. "When the preacher comes," she said, voice steady now, "I'll write my name." Brock Maddox gave a single nod. No smile, no claim. Just a quiet ease in his eyes. He closed the box and slid it back beneath the bed. That night, as the wind pressed hard against the cabin walls, they lay beside each other again. But the space between them had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was choice. And both of them knew it. Weeks passed. Then one day the preacher came. His wagon rattled into the clearing behind a tired mule as snow drifted thick along the ridge. His beard was white with frost, his shoulders bent from miles of empty road. Brock Maddox stepped outside to meet him, rifle slung at his side out of habit, eyes already measuring what this visit would bring. Yazi stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her face worn from everything she had carried. But the man stepping down from the mule looked even more worn than she did. Not dangerous, just tired in a way that came from too many miles and too many empty roads. The preacher adjusted the satchel beneath his coat and nodded once. "Evenin'," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "I've got my ledger, if you're still set on using it." His gaze moved between Brock Maddox and Yazi, making sure neither of them stood there unwilling. Brock Maddox gave a short nod. "We are." "Then let's get to it." Inside, the preacher set the ledger on the table and lit a lantern. The faint scratch of his pencil filled the quiet as he flipped to a clean page. "Names?" Brock Maddox spoke first, slow and clear. Then it was her turn. Yazi paused only for a breath, just enough to feel the weight of it. Then said her name, steady, strong, like she was daring the world to deny it. The preacher wrote it down exactly as she gave it, For the first time, her name stood beside his. Not taken. Not forced. Chosen. From the cedar box, Brock Maddox pulled out the ring he had forged from a horseshoe nail. There was no ceremony, no grand words, just something real, made by his own hands. He slid it onto her finger. Its weight carried more than metal. Every silence they had shared, every meal, every danger they had faced side by side. Yazi placed her hand over his, not out of duty, but because she chose to. The preacher closed the ledger, tucked it away, and gave a single nod. It's done. He stayed long enough to share a bowl of stew, spinning a story about a stray cat in Santa Fe that hunted rabbits twice its size. The tale was so ridiculous it pulled a rare smile from both of them. Then he climbed back onto his cart and disappeared into the falling snow. When the door shut behind him, the cabin felt smaller, but warmer. Brock Maddox fed the stove, the fire crackling steady. Yazi turned the ring slowly on her finger, her face calm, though her thoughts ran deeper than she showed. One question still remained. She was the one who spoke it. When spring comes, I'm still going after my brother. I'm not giving up on Nico. Brock Maddox met her eyes without hesitation. Then we go together, he said. You won't be out there alone. That settled something inside her. He hadn't tied her to that cabin. He had chosen to stand beside her. They spoke of smaller things after that. She told him where berries could still be found beneath snow. He said he'd finish her second pair of moccasins before the deep freeze settled in. Simple plans, stacked up like firewood by the door. Necessary. Theirs. That night, when they lay down, the space between them didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt steady, like the quiet rhythm of the fire burning low. She slept, knowing she wouldn't be handed over. He slept knowing he wasn't alone anymore. By morning, the snow lay thicker outside, but inside the cabin nothing felt unsettled. Fear had turned into choice. Suspicion had grown into something stronger. What began in the bite of a steel trap had bound two lives together, not by chance, but by decision.